Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Shabbos, Parak Tes, chapter 9, and we are up to Mishnah Daled, Mishnah 4. Today we're going to do Daled and Hey. Okay. Minayin l'sicha shi kashtiya b'yom kippurim. How do we know that when one anoints oneself with oil, that it's similar to drinking on Yom Kippur? The halacha is that we know of the things that are forbidden to do on Yom Kippur is eating and drinking. Where a person to drink intentionally on Yom Kippur, they could carry potentially the punishment of kares, premature death. And then one of the other forbidden activities on Yom Kippur is sicha. That means anointing yourself, taking some kind of a ointment or oil and rubbing onto yourself. Any kind of application of a liquid to your body. So how do we know that sicha is like drinking? How do we know that the act of anointing oneself with oil is equivalent to drinking? Now, the Bartanura points out that this question of that they're the same means to say they're the same in the sense that they are forbidden, that they're forbidden to do. But were a person to do sicha on Yom Kippur intentionally, there is no punishment of kares. It's only for eating and drinking. But the point is, from where do we know that, where do we know means where do we have some kind of a source from sukkim, from verses to say that sicha, anointing oneself with oil, is like drinking. So the answer the Mishnah gives is although there is no proof to this matter, zeicha l'davar. But again, we have a hint to it. Shenemar, as it says, v'tavoi chamayim b'kirbai, it shall come like water inside him, and like oil in his bones. Now this pasuk is talking, because David HaMelech was talking about those who had pursued him, those who wanted to destroy him, even after all the kindnesses that he did with them. And he says that the punishment that will come upon them, or the curse that will come upon them, will be like there will be like water that goes inside a person, and like oil that goes into his bones. Now, when it talks about water going inside the person, what does that mean? So it would sound like it's talking about drinking, right? That's typically how water goes. When you talk about water going inside a person, it's with drinking. And it compares drinking to oil in one's bones, which is not drinking, that's anointing, that's smearing it on yourself. So the fact that the pasuk equates the two, compares the two, it compares the water coming inside you, which is drinking, to anointing, to the oil going inside the bones, which is anointing. That means they are considered the same. And that would seemingly be a source to say that anointing oneself is like drinking. The reason why the Mishnah says it's a zeicha l'davar, it's not a complete proof, is because of the fact that you could say that when it says the water will come inside him, that's talking about bathing, because when you bathe, water goes into you also through the pores in your skin. So therefore, although it's not a 100% proof to the idea here, nonetheless, it definitely alludes to it. Okay, that's Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Hey. Mishnah goes back to the laws of Shabbos. Hamoitzi eitzim. Going back to how much do you have to carry out of different objects and different things to be considered liable for the act of haitzah, of transferring. So hamoitzi eitzim, somebody who carries out wood, which means firewood, wood that we use for fire. Kadei lavasho beitza kala, enough wood to cook up a easily cooked egg. As we had before, the easiest egg to cook is a chicken egg. And the Mishnah, so enough wood to cook up an egg, which again, an egg is the easiest kind of egg to cook up. It takes the least amount of heat. And therefore, enough wood to go ahead and do that would be considered the act of haitzah. But as we learned before, we're not just talking about the chicken egg as is, but it's talking about mixed with oil and placed in a preheated pan. And we're not talking about enough wood to cook the entire egg, but to cook the piece of an egg that's the size of a dried fig, the gregaris. Okay, so that's the first thing in the Mishnah. Next, tavalin, spices. How much spices? What's the minimum amount of spices to carry out that's significant that you'd be considered doing the act of haitzah? Tavlin, spices, enough to spice up a easy egg. The easy egg, again, is a chicken egg. Chicken egg, being that's the tastiest, it needs the least amount of spices to make it tasty. So therefore, when it comes to spices, enough spices, again, to cook up the egg and I'm assuming it means well, okay, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, I probably still talking about a gregaris, talking about the entire egg, talking about the gregaris amount of egg, the volume of a dried fig, and that is the amount that we're talking about. Enough spices to spice that up. Then the Mishnah says, and when we're talking about spices, even if we're talking about different spices, they can combine with each other. Meaning all spices, whatever we're talking about, they have the same measure, they have the same amount. What's the amount? Enough to spice up a chicken egg. So the rule is we had before that if certain things of the same, call it the same category, share the same amount, the same size, the same amount to be liable for haitzah, they can combine. So therefore, were you to have a combination here of spices, each spice on its own would not be enough to spice up the chicken egg. But now you have a number of different spices, and together there'll be enough to spice up a chicken egg. And they are the kind of spices that you would mix together to spice up a chicken egg. Then the halacha is they could come together. They can combine to make your minimum amount to be chayav for haitzah, being that they share the same amount. Each one on its own shares the same amount to be considered haitzah. Next, klipe egoizim. Klipe egoizim is translated here as the shells of, or actually they call it better, the nut husks, which is not talking about the hard nut shell. It's talking about the husk that's on the outside of the hard shell. Okay, so we're talking about and this list of things are used to make dyes. They're used to make dyes. So therefore, we say klipe egoizim, the husks of nuts, klipe remainim, pomegranate peels, isatis. Isatis is woad. W-O-A-D. It's a type of a plant. Okay? Yeah. Next is pua. Upua. What's pua? Pua is translated as madder. M-A-D-D-E-R. Again, a type of a plant. It's used to make dyes. And they say here that the woad makes a bluish dye and the madder makes a red dye. Okay? So all these things in this list are things that are used for producing dye from them. So how much of them would you be liable for carrying out? Meaning what would be the minimum amount of what a person would hold onto of these things to create a certain amount of dye? What amount of dye? Enough to dye the small cloth that is in a svacha, that's a woman's headdress. They explain that here on the bottom as this is a net-like headdress that was adorned on top with a small colored cloth. That's what it was. People would not go to the trouble of making dye for a piece of cloth smaller than this. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the amount that produces enough dye for such a cloth is the minimum considered significant. Okay, now, the next list, and the next one is going to be a little bit surprising, but this is what it is. Next, Mei Raglayim. Mei Raglayim is urine. Okay, all this list are all things that are used to either used as detergents or to make a detergent from them. So Mei Raglayim is urine. And on the bottom, they explain here that urine was left to sit until it fermented and then used as a detergent. Okay, so that's Mei Raglayim. Neser, they translate Neser as alum. Alum, A-L-U-M, alum. Okay. Next, ubairis. Bairis they translate as soap. Now on the bottom, excuse me.
Live, technically, no.
I don't know. Okay. It says here by the soap. This refers to a plant, soapwort, that was used as a cleanser. That's what it says. Okay. It was used as a cleanser. Okay. Next, keep losing the place here. Kamunya. Kamunya, they translate as the first. The before was soapwort. This one is saltwort.
Spell that, please.
Saltwort.
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 Okay.
S-A-L-T-W-O-R-T. Okay, and the last one is ashlug, which the Bartanura says about ashlug. I believe he says by ashlug, he says, I don't know what it is. On the bottom, they bring down here, it's a Gemara, they say, The Gemara describes ashlag as a substance found inside the holes of pearls that was removed with a pointed iron instrument. Okay. Kedei l'chabes ben beged katan b'svacha. How much of them? What's the minimum amount of them to be considered significant? Enough to be able to cleanse the small garment that's in the headdress. But for this piece of garment in the headdress becomes our measure, both for dyes, for what you would use to produce dyes, and also for what you would use either to use as detergent or to produce detergent from for this small garment to clean it. Rabbi Yehuda says that the minimum amount of these of a couple, let's put it this way, at least a couple of ones of these, which here on the bottom they say it's talking about urine, alum, salt, and ashlag. That Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says that the minimum amount of those things that are considered significant for cleansing purposes is kadei lahaver ala kesem, to be able to apply to a kesem, to a blood spot. Now, what that means is like this. If a woman finds a stain on one of her clothes and does not know whether it is menstrual blood or a dye, if it's menstrual blood, depending on the size and other conditions, it can make her into a nida, or is it dye? So it can be identified by applying to it the 7 kinds of detergents listed in Nida, Perek Tes Mishna Vav. If the stain remains after all the detergents are applied, it cannot be blood, but must be a dye. The substance is listed in our Mishnah among those 7 detergents. So according to Rabbi Yehuda says, actually, the amount that you would use to apply to a blood stain are actually less than the amount that you would use to be able to cleanse the small cloth of the headdress. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's actually a lesser amount that's significant, and that lesser amount is based on how much of these things, or some of these things, you would use as a detergent to apply to the blood stain. At the end of the day, Bartunura says, Allah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.